So today is the second in the series, on Singapore art, right? Last month I talked about painting, all right? So today will be sculpture. The next two talks will be on contemporary ink as well as contemporary art in Singapore. Now, last month when I spoke about painting, okay, I did mention, this particular exhibition in the National Museum called, what's that called? Now, paint, anyway, okay, sometimes, just have a kind of, brain, short circuit or something. But anyway, it's a show about painting in Singapore from the 1950s to the 1970s. It's called A Changed World. Yes, now it's come back to me. Okay, and I did mention that in that exhibition, right, one glaring omission, although it's a good show, right, one glaring omission was the absence of sculpture. Okay, I believe there were only two freestanding sculpture. Okay, and one kind of sculpture made from everyday objects by Cheong Su Ping. Okay, I think these were about the only few, sculptural works. Okay, and those two sculptures were by this artist called Ng Eng Teng, whom I will be speaking about later on. Right now, I suppose this reflects a kind of perception. Okay, perhaps here in Singapore that there was an absence, okay, or a lack of a sculpture scene, okay, especially before the 1970s, right? I don't know, somehow, and this perception is reflected in the fact that there's little written about, sculpture, before the 1970s. Okay, so a lot of literature pertaining to sculpture, okay, are actually from the 1970s onwards, right? But my own research has proven this to be not so correct, and that there were many sculptors even practicing before, the Second World War, right, and even practicing in the 1960s. Okay, although I have to acknowledge that sculpture, has always been secondary to painting, right, in the Singapore art scene. Right? So this particular subject, means a lot to me. I mean, I have a lot of personal interest, right, in this particular subject on sculpture. Right? Now, just to briefly tell you about the scope of today's talk, right, I'll be taking a chronological kind of view of sculpture, all right, tracing sculpture all the way back from the late 19th century all the way to the contemporary. Okay, and at the end of the talk, we'll also be briefly discussing about the so-called expanded notion of sculpture. Right? What constitutes sculpture today? All right, and I'll also be talking briefly about some of the issues, right, surrounding public sculpture. Okay, in recent months, there's been a lot of discussion about public sculpture with the the establishment, for example, of the private art trust. The public art trust. Okay, I'll be talking briefly about that later on. Now, talking about public sculpture, right? Now, this is not to test you, but maybe just to oh, sorry, maybe I'll just operate from here to see if these are familiar to you, right? Now, are they familiar to you? Now, anyone here have seen all the 6 works? Wow, that's great. Okay, and do you know who are the artists behind these 6 works? Some, huh? Okay, good. Okay, and I think for the rest, okay, you're probably not so sure. You've probably not seen them. This is probably the first time. Okay, that's fine. Okay, because I would say most of these sculptures are quite accessible, except for the one on the lower right. Okay, that's I'll be talking about that later. That odd-looking, quirky figure, right? That's perched on the pedestal. Okay, that's a work by Ng Eng Teng. Okay, that's in NUS, on the grounds of NUS. Okay, but the rest are actually in the city, right? In the city. So from left to right, above, on the left you have Anyone knows the nutmeg and mace sculpture? No, it's quite similar. Han Sai-po, I think, has a similar one. It's by Kumari Nahapan. Okay, in case you don't know who Kumari Nahapan is, right? She's also a painter, but more recently, she has, she has been making sculptures. And I think when I mentioned that she's the one who created those monumental red chili sculptures, I think, right? Right, the name probably, would seem more familiar to you. Okay. Yeah, and that's in Ion Orchard, right? But recently they have shifted it, right? Shifted the location to another part of Ion Orchard. I don't know, in Singapore we always have this habit of shifting things, okay? And that's a problem for public sculpture, right? Okay, and for public art, okay, as a whole, right? And then the one in the middle, the very colorful one that looks like a Christmas tree, right? Okay, that's a work called Momentum by David Gerstein, or Gerstein. All right, and that's in, anyone knows? Finlayson Green, right? The exact location, right? In the city, right? In the central business district. Okay, and it shows, it's actually made of metal. Okay, layers upon layers of human figures building up to a kind of momentum, right? Reflecting the dynamism, the energy of, the vibrant city of Singapore, right? And of course, people, as I said, have criticized it as being a Christmas tree, right? It's being a much derided sculpture, okay? But others see it as, well, it provides a very good contrast, okay, with the dour, kind of buildings in the background, okay? So you have something very colorful, right? Okay, to provide vibrancy to the area, okay? And also to serve as a kind of cultural marker in a sense. Then on the third sculpture, bottom, the top, okay? The third one at the top is work by Ao Ti Hong, right? Ao Ti Hong is a well-known, right? I will call him, a kind of a second generation artist, right? He's a painter as well as sculptor, and his works can be seen right around Singapore. And this one can be seen in the, in that Boat Quay, right? Boat Quay area. Okay, it depicts. He wanted to, the sculptures were done to mark it as a historical site. Okay, where there were a lot of trading being done, during the 19th century, right? And it depicts Louis Johnston, who is a well-known businessman and also an arbiter of public, disputes. Okay, here is probably trying to settle a dispute between a Malay chief and a Chinese trader, right? And the baby, the big baby, the big white baby. Okay, that's a work by Mark Quinn. Okay, Mark Quinn, is most well known for his own self-portraits made from his own blood. Okay, right. So he was, and here this is a work by him. I don't know whether you have seen it. It's somewhere around Marina Bay, Gardens by the Bay. That's right. Okay. Well, personally, I've not seen it yet. Okay. And this work again is by a foreign. Again, there's been a lot of discussion about Singapore trying to bring in public works, okay, or commissioning public works by so-called A-list artists. Okay, so we have works by Anish Kapoor, right? We have works by Dali. Okay, and so that in a sense there's been discussion about whether local sculptors have been left out in a sense. Okay, but with the establishment of the Public Art Trust, okay, I think things will change. Okay, I'll be talking a little bit about that later. Okay, and then of course the bird. Okay, no second guessing who did that. We have some of the works here by the same artist, Botero. Okay, Botero, and Eng Teng's Contentment. Okay, I'll be talking about that later on. That's a really historic and iconic work, right, of Singapore art. Okay, so much for the quiz. Now, the sculpture that I'm going to talk about today, refers to what we understand conventionally as sculpture. All right, meaning to say three-dimensional forms, okay, something that has mass, something that has volume, all right, something which involves the transformation of materials, okay, something that has what you call ponderability, ponderous quality, okay. Really sculpture in what you call the modern Western tradition, okay, as opposed, for example, to traditional sculpture, okay, what we term religious or decorative or even monumental sculpture, okay, like those found in churches or temples. All right, and now this is to be distinguished from, sorry, there's a typo there, right, from installation, conceptual, and so-called ready-mades. Ready-mades are these found objects, that were bought from a second-hand store and then displayed as art. Okay, but again, I'll be discussing this about the expanded definition of sculpture, right, towards the end of my talk. Okay. Well, so I'm not going to talk about this today, right? Anyone recognize this? Of course, these are the gory, grotesque sculptures that you find in Haw Par Villa. Okay, now such sculptures really belong to what you call the folk tradition. Okay, they were normally made not by an individual single sculptor, but by a team of so-called craftsmen, right? Now again, there's a debate about this distinction between art and craft and all that. Okay, but let's just say that I'm not going to talk about such works today, right? Now, anyone know what or which is the most recognizable sculpture in Singapore? Anyone? Of course, right. No, it's a Stamford Raffles, and this was executed in the 19th century, in the late 19th century. Anyone knows who sculpted the Raffles statue? No idea. Yeah, I was telling my student, hey, you should know this, right, as a Singaporean, right? Well, actually, I don't blame them because I think not many Americans know who sculpted the Statue of Liberty, right? Okay, but we should at least know, right, who sculpted this work. Okay, but anyway, before coming to that, right, this particular work was actually unveiled in 1887 on the Golden Jubilee of Queen Victoria's reign. Okay, and this picture, makes a statement. If you look at the photo on the left, okay, because it was unveiled by the Governor Sir Frederick Well in the presence of the Malay princes and rulers, right? So you could see that, one could see the symbolic importance of this sculpture, right? And it's the same with, other sculptures in this, made in this tradition. This is what you call commemorative, or even what you call heroic sculpture. Okay, sculptures that were meant to celebrate the achievements of, a famous person, right? Now, it was first sited somewhere along the Esplanade, and then it's moved to the Padang, right? As you can see there, a picture on your right, okay? And then in 1919, it was moved to its present site of the Victoria Memorial Hall, right? There it is. And that's the sculptor, Thomas Woolner. Right? Now, who is Thomas Woolner? I mean, he's not terribly well known, but he's actually quite an established sculptor. Okay, he was a member of what they call the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, okay, in Britain, right? And and later on he went to Australia to look for gold, right? And while there, he actually did a sculpture of Captain James Cook, all right? And he was also commissioned to make this sculpture of Sir Stamford Raffles. Okay. I don't believe that we have a record saying, stating where it was done, okay, but it's unlikely that it was done here. It's probably done overseas and then, shipped to Singapore, right? So this is in the tradition of what you call commemorative sculpture. You see Raffles there, okay, standing in a dignified manner with his arms folded, all right, okay, and there's a tablet there. Okay, now the tablet was also added in 1919. Okay, that's the 100th anniversary of the founding of Singapore. Right? And do you know there's another Raffles sculpture? Oh, where's my white Raffles? Okay, that's the black Raffles. Okay, and then there's actually another white Raffles made of what you call poly marble. Okay, and it stands not far from this Raffles sculpture, somewhere along in Boat Quay as well. Right, and it marks the site where Raffles supposedly landed. Okay, so we have actually two. Now the later version is a copy of the Raffles sculpture. Now the pre-war period. Now I did mention in the painting talk last month, okay, that in the early 20th century there were many artists who came to Singapore from China. Okay, and some of them settled in Singapore, right? And many of them, taught in the Chinese middle schools. They founded art societies, okay? But they were also primarily painters, okay? And I think that's because of the strong pictorial tradition of China. Okay, that could be a reason, right? So we don't have, for example, in the pre-war period, a noted Chinese sculptor or even a noted local sculptor. Okay, there would have been, but we haven't found any records so far. Okay, so in my own research, what I found is that, okay, the sculptors who practiced before the Second World War are predominantly Western. Okay, they were Europeans, right, who settled in Singapore for varying periods of time. Okay, all of them eventually left Singapore, right? Now the question is that, can their works be considered to be, part of Singapore art? That's again, it can be discussed. Okay, but of course they practice here, they make the works here, the provenance is, is Singapore. So rightly it belongs to, the history of Singapore art. Okay, so I'm going to highlight a few of these sculptors. Okay, I don't think you would have heard of, most of them. Okay. Okay, and many of them came here, they undertook important commissions for important people. Okay, and the press also loved them. They have been, the press covered them quite a bit, all right, and their works. Okay, and these are the names of some of the sculptors: Carl Dudek, Dora Gordin, Rudolfo Nolli. Okay, I don't know whether you have heard of these individuals. All right, they came here, as I said, undertook commissions. They held exhibitions. Right, and one of them, Carl Dudek, even established a sculpture school. And as far as I know, that's the only sculpture school that we ever had in Singapore. Right? Maybe I'm wrong, right? Okay. Mr. Choi, am I wrong or right? Yeah, okay. Well, Mr. Choi will come into the picture later, of course.
I didn't even know there was one. So
oh,
that'd be wrong.
okay.
Carry on, please.
Rudolfo Nolli. Now, who is Nolli? Now, Nolli first came to this part of the world, to Southeast Asia, okay, with a group of other Italian artists at the invitation of the King of Siam. I believe it was Chulalongkorn, right, to decorate his throne room. Okay, and after that, he came to Singapore to undertake a commission in Singapore, right? And while in Singapore, although most of his works unfortunately have disappeared or have been destroyed. Okay, I've been trying to trace many of his works, but to no avail. We have a lot of archival footage of photographs, okay, of Nolli and his workshop, Okay, he eventually set up a workshop in Grange Road, okay, with a large team of assistants to help him, right? To help him to make artificial stonework, okay, to make you know, sculptures for buildings, right, etc. Okay, and of course his most famous work is the sculptures he did for the, you know, for the Supreme Court. Okay, for the Supreme Court. Here you go. This is, and of course the central figure is that of justice, right? And you can see here, you know, justice has to be fair, I suppose, right? And merciful. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. Now, what do you all know about, now if you look at the figure of justice, what do you all notice about justice? Anyone can tell me? One peculiar feature about justice. No? Oh, she holds a skill. I mean, that's quite precisely. She's not blindfolded. Okay, so I don't know whether that was deliberately left out or, you know, it was an oversight. Okay, I'm not sure. All right. Okay, but that's quite a serious oversight. I mean, injustice is not here. Is right. It's not blind. You know, I mean, justice should be blind, right? By right. Okay. And these works were done in what you call the neoclassical style, okay, of sculpture. Okay, and okay, but some of his works still survive, right? I don't know whether you have seen this. This is a pair of very modern-looking, stylized, you know, lions. Okay, a pair of lions that stand outside the Bank of China building in Fullerton. Okay, and it was done by Rodolfo Nolli. You can see Nolli there with one of his right, guardian lions. Okay, and I don't know. I mean, people like Mr. Choi and, you know, and others may remember this. Remember this? He used to stand at the Merdeka Bridge, which is part of Nickel Highway. I remember when I was young, you know, I used to see this lion all the time. Right? There's a pair of lions. Okay, but today they are out of sight, out of public sight, because they are now located in what you call the SAFTI, the Singapore Armed Forces Training Institute in Jurong. Okay, I've actually been trying to get the National Gallery, you know, to get back these sculptures and, you know, put it in the new museum. Right? I think they belong there, you know, really, rather than out of public sight. Okay. And I'm not sure why, you know, is now in SAFTI. Okay, it may resemble the SAFTI logo. I think the SAFTI logo is of a lion as well. Right? It could be that. Now, for those in the sculpture circle, right, we always believe that these 4 allegorical sculptures, right, depicting industry, commerce, and all that, were done by the hands of Rodolfo Nolli, okay, for a long time. Okay, we have taught that, but it's only until like 1 or 2 years ago, okay, where, you know, someone you know, found that and have conclusive evidence that these sculptures were not made by the hands of Rodolfo Nolli. Right? Now, these sculptures are located in the Merlion, the former Merlion railway station. Right? And it was found that they were actually made by 2 other Italian artists, sculptors, Bigazzi and Vanetti. And how do we know that? Okay, now, you know, we should look at the right places, I suppose. Okay, someone with a very good zoom, you know, camera took a picture. Okay, and found that, I mean, you can have no better evidence than this, right? Okay, but we cannot discount that Nolli didn't oversee this, okay, because he was also responsible for certain, I suppose, decorative work in the station itself, okay, and he could have a hand in this, okay, but we are not sure. But here you see the signatures, okay, do not belong to Nolli, but to the 2, right, other Italian sculptors. Okay, and then we have Carl Dudek. Now, I have a very personal interest in Carl Dudek, okay, because in about, I believe it was 2002, okay, I met this particular woman, okay, and she identified herself as a daughter of Carl Dudig. Okay, she knew that I had an interest in, in sculpture, and then she told me about her dad, Carl Dudig. Okay, and that if I was interested in going to Melbourne, okay, to do research on her father, right, which I eventually did for about a month. Okay, I spent there trawling through the archive, and the archives are so well preserved. Okay, and it's a joy going through the archive. There were like photos and letters, and all that, and all those were enough, I suppose, for us to construct not only, the works of Carl Dudig, but even what Singapore was like in the 30s, right? Okay, so those are very valuable documents. Carl Dudig, now eventually, of course, they had to leave Singapore, they were deported. Okay, now Carl Dudig was originally born in Poland, then he moved to Austria. Okay, and from Austria, because of the war, they moved to Singapore in about 1938. And because they were holders of the Axis passport, they were considered to be enemy aliens. And in 1940, unfortunately, they were deported to Melbourne, Australia, okay, where they eventually settled down. Right? And Singapore left the deepest impression on him. Okay? And I can go so far as to say that if it were not for circumstances, he would have stayed in Singapore. For how long, I don't know. Okay? So here you see Carl Dudig making a sculpture wearing his characteristic beret. Right? And he's a very versatile sculptor. He could work with a variety of materials: wood, marble, clay. When he came to Singapore, because of the tropical climate, he had to work with clay. Okay, although in Austria, where he trained in the academy there, right, he was working with marble. Okay, but of course Singapore, you couldn't find, it was very hard to get marble here. Okay, so he had to adapt and to work with clay. And he came to Singapore with only, I think, 1 or 2 works. Okay, but he left about close to 80 works before he left Singapore. Now that's very prolific, right, in less than 2 years. Okay, and from this photograph of the interior of his house, which was also his studio in St. Thomas Walk. Now St. Thomas Walk is a historic kind of, road, I suppose, a place, because that's where NAFA was located as well. And in fact, his house was just beside NAFA. But interestingly enough, NAFA didn't employ him to teach sculpture. Okay? Right? In fact, there was virtually no sculpture course in NAFA, right, until the 1970s. Right? There was for a moment before the war, but it disappeared, okay, for some reason. And you can see that, he created a variety of works here. Right? Not only sculptures, but he was also a ceramicist. So he made ceramics, right, masks, right? And you could see the kind of the iconography of his figures, meaning to say that, you can see this, one of his favorite kind of figure is this figure bearing a receptacle, right, on a head. And here he was, of course, influenced by what he saw in Singapore. Okay, the Indian woman, right, would, bearing, what you call receptacles on their head, right? So it actually influenced the content of his work as well. And Dudig was significant because maybe unlike other European sculptors, he didn't isolate himself. He mixed with the local community, right? He got acquainted, for example, with the very famous radical writer, Yu Tafu. Okay, Yu Tafu was eventually executed by the Japanese. Okay, and of course later on, I'll talk about Aw Boon Haw, right? Okay, he also was commissioned by Aw Boon Haw to make a sculpture, right? And now, he was an avid tennis player. Okay, so I suppose while playing tennis one day, he saw this ball boy. Okay, and he was always fascinated by the kind of the Oriental appearance. I mean, there's a kind of exoticization, but anyway, he was struck by Oriental faces. Okay, and he asked the ball boy to, to pose for him. Okay, and he was struck also by the ball boys. That the ball boy could be so could pose for so long without moving, And I think that's an observation by another sculptor called Dora Gordin, right? It could probably be attributed to the politeness of Asian society, of Asians that, right? You could be so obedient and polite, right? And so you see here the ball boy, right, posing for him. And he did a plaster. I mean, the original sculpture was made in plaster. You can see the photo on the right, on the left. And it was eventually cast into bronze. Okay, I believe there are only 2 bronze versions, right? One of them is with the National Gallery, right? Okay, in fact, how the National Gallery came to acquire that, in fact, I was contacted by a Indian family, and they told me that, they have this sculpture of this, this Malay boy. And I said, how do you acquire it? And they told me that, their father was a driver for the British Army, okay, and when the Japanese invaded, okay, apparently there was a Western man, who he gave a lift, in his, I suppose his rover or something, his military vehicle, and that man left the sculpture with him. I don't know whether it's as a gift, as gratitude to him, okay, but it's, so it was with the family for decades after the war. Okay, and so I helped to help them to get the at that time was the Singapore Museum, right, to acquire, right, this work. Okay, I don't know whether the boy is still alive, right? Okay, that'll be interesting to find out. Okay, as I mentioned earlier that they receive quite a bit of coverage, even Duldig. Okay, so here you see the newspaper called the Merlion Bungalow. Okay, running a story on Duldig. Of course, the heading is wrong, right? Okay, he wasn't, I mean, Dora Gordin, was already did some hits in Singapore, right? Okay, so he wasn't the first, right, to do this, this so-called portrait hits. And he did another one of this daughter of an expatriate couple, right? Her name is Eva Flinter. And that sculpture is lost, right? It's untraceable, unfortunately. Okay, in fact, many of his sculptures, again, have either been destroyed or simply disappeared. And later on, he got acquainted with, of course, Ao Boon Haw, right? The Tiger Balm King, okay? Who then commissioned him, I believe, to make 4 sculptures of himself and his brother, Ao Boon Pa. Okay, so, and he made the sculptures and it was already ready to be cast into bronze. But unfortunately, Duldig had to leave Singapore. Okay, so his family wasn't sure whether this sculpture was eventually cast into bronze. But in 1957, when the family received, I think someone told them that, they saw this sculpture in the Tiger Balm Gardens in Hong Kong. All right. So in 1957, this sculpture was again rediscovered, right? And today it stands in the family's ancestral home in Fujian province in China. Okay, it's about 6 feet, right? It's life size. And Dora Gordin. Okay, probably in terms of stature, international stature. Okay, she probably would have been the most famous sculptor, okay, who had worked in Singapore. Oops. Now, already, before coming, Gordin was born in what is today Estonia, right, part of Russia, right, at that time. And she later on went to Paris to study music and art, right? And then later on she had a couple of successful exhibitions. First in London, in Leicester Gallery, right? And then in Berlin. Okay, so she has already built up quite a reputation before she came to Singapore. Okay, then after that she started on a sojourn to the Far East, to India, to China, and then to Southeast Asia, right? To Bali and all that. Okay, So, so before she even came to Singapore, she was already famous. Okay, she in fact did many commissions of the sculptures of famous people, right? Aristocrats, the wealthy elites, right? Even ordinary people, right? And in fact, so the Singapore government, right, at that time, the British authorities, they were urged to acquire, to commission Gordin to make some sculptures for Singapore. And here's their reason, right? They said that, it's actually a complaint that we have today about Singapore as well, right? Okay, for being too pragmatic, always concerned with the dollar. Okay, so this is nothing new. This was in the 1930s, right? Okay, so they have, and this is the Straits Times article, which in fact, in a sense, lauded the British authorities for commissioning, a famous sculptor like Gordin, okay, to make this series of sculptures, right, for Singapore. And they said they have wiped away the reproach that Singapore is blind to the humanities and cares only for the dollar. Okay, and it's the same today. We want to turn Singapore into a global city for the arts, right? At that time, they were trying to do that as well. So they think that by acquiring Gordin's work, they can turn Singapore into one of the art centers of Asia, right? So eventually, they acquired 6 works, okay, by Gordin, 5 heads, and 1 torso. Right now, the torso is the only one I believe that is currently missing, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, there are 5 heads today, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Singapore would have all the 5 heads. Okay, although they are not all with the museum. Okay, some of them are still with the Parliament House. Okay, they are owned by Parliament House. And the 5 heads, and again, we are not sure. Now, if you look at the heads, they are quite idealized, okay, quite sensuous as well. And in fact, when she was in Paris, she was actually encouraged by this very famous sculptor called Mayol, okay, Mayol, M-A-I-L-O-L, okay, Mayol, and so when you look at these heads, they are rather idealized representations of the various ethnic groups. Okay. Now, Malay, Indian, Chinese head we can understand because these are the ethnic groups in Singapore. But there are a couple of others like Mongolian head. Okay, we're not sure why she was asked to do a Mongolian head, right? And the torso actually that's missing is a torso of a Cossack. Okay, so we are not sure again why a Cossack, right? Okay, and we are not sure again why the British authorities are interested in representations of ethnic groups, right, as a subject. Okay, and these were eventually displayed in the interior of what you call the municipal building. I'm not sure whether that's City Hall. Okay, it could be City Hall, right, the municipal building, right. So today they are actually displayed. Okay, well, at least that's the last time when I saw it, right, along the corridors of Parliament House. Okay. And I believe the National Gallery has a couple of these heads as well. And Dora Gordin is made more famous, I would say, right, by her association with our own very famous war heroine, Elizabeth Choi. Okay, and as you know, Elizabeth Choi was tortured by the Japanese, okay, by giving money and food to the prisoners in Changi, right, and acting as an informant for the British. Okay, and after the war, she and her husband went to London, partly to recuperate, okay, partly to receive a medal from, I believe it's the OBE, okay, from the British king. Okay, and she, and while there, she met Gordin, and Gordin was also struck by a figure, I suppose, and asked her to pose for her. Okay, but having been tortured by the Japanese, right, Elizabeth Choi was a bit conscious of her own body. Okay, but eventually she relented, and she saw the whole experience as a very therapeutic one for her. Right. So here you have, 2 of the sculptures of Elizabeth Choi. One is Serene Jade, which is in a collection of the National Museum. Okay, and the other one is Flawless Crystal, which is today in London. Okay, I'm not sure in which institution. Okay, I'll move on now to the post-war period. Now we are talking here from the Karl Dodig left in 1940, right? And Norley stayed until the 1950s, right? But from after the war, right, in the 1940s, the post-war period, okay, the 1940s, the 1950s, okay, it seemed that, there were very few sculptors who work here in Singapore, okay, and we have no really evidence of work that were done in the 1940s, okay, and very few works that were done in the 1950s. And I have, in a sense, come up with a few reasons why this was so. Okay, why sculpture was so marginalized, right, in the local scene here, right, in Singapore. Right, I think firstly is the exclusion from the formal curriculum of institutional learning, meaning, as I mentioned, NAFA didn't, they only ran a brief course on sculpture before the war, and after that it just disappeared from the curriculum until the 1970s. Okay, and unfortunately Dodig established an art school, a sculptor school, but he had to leave Singapore in 1940. Okay, so there was nowhere that yes, there's no name actually, yeah. I think there could be a name, but there's no formal name as such, right? Okay, I don't know whether it's called the Karl Dodig School of Sculpture, right? I'm not sure, but yeah, but it didn't have a formal name. So if you wanted to learn sculpture at that time, there was nowhere that you could go to get formal learning. Okay, so many of the artists who emerged in the 60s or even the 50s were actually self-taught. Okay, although I have to say later on in the British Council, they did run art courses. Okay, but I don't think they ran any courses on sculpture. Okay, but we know of our local sculptor called Ng Teng, right? Ng Teng actually learned his craft from Jean Bullock. Right, Jean Bullock was actually the wife of a airman, right, who was based in Singapore, right? Okay, and she taught him, okay, how to do the portrait heads and how to work in cement fondue, a sculptural material and all that. Okay, right. So, but there was no formal kind of institution which offered sculpture, right? And of course, the second one is still holds true today: the scarcity of space for both practice and display, right? I mean, for display, of course, you must have a big house to to show your sculpture, right? And for practice, you must have a big workshop, right, in order to create large works, okay, or even to run a foundry. Okay, in Singapore, don't have the facilities. Even today, right, if you wanted to cast your works into bronze, you have to bring your work to Thailand. The sculpture here is, I suppose compared to those in the West, there's been little research done. Okay, in fact, less research, less written about compared to those in the West, right? Okay, the discourse surrounding sculpture, right, is less here. Okay, so those are the reasons for why there was a kind of a lack of practice of sculpture, right, in the 40s, especially in the 1950s as well. Okay, this is again where I have to mention Mr. Choi, because in the it was only although there were exhibitions in between. The Singapore Society was founded in 1949, okay, and they held annual exhibitions, okay, but in those exhibitions which would have easily a couple of hundred works, right, there was just a very handful of sculptures. In fact, sometimes you don't even find sculptures at all in these exhibitions, right? So that again tells you that there wasn't a kind of a practice of sculpture here, right? Especially in the 40s and 50s, okay? And for example, in the exhibitions of the Equator Art Society, right, another kind of art society, again, in the exhibitions there were only like a handful of sculptures, right? And they were done by artists who were, I suppose, self-taught. Okay, they never, in a sense, also went or had any formal training in sculpture, right? So the first sculpture exhibition, right, that was actually held in Singapore, by, I would say, local sculptors, right, was in 1967. Okay, it's called the first sculpture exhibition, and it was curated by none other than Mr. Choi here, right, Mr. Choi Wing Yang.
I didn't know it was the first.
Okay. And Mr. Choi curated that sculpture in 1967. And 7 artists, I won't use the word sculptors because, if I look at the 7, probably only about 2 or 3 of them, okay, can be actually considered sculptors. That means they work primarily, right, with 3-dimensional forms. All right, the rest were like, Chong Su Ping was there, Su Ping was, of course, he's also very innovative and versatile, okay, but he was essentially also a painter, I would say, okay, but he did very innovative sculptural works, right, using everyday, found materials, right, to create what he called his metal constructions, right. And then we have Lim Yu Kwan. Lim Yu Kwan also works with both painting and sculpture. Okay, of course, he's the son of the founder of NAFA, right, Lim Hak Tai. Okay, and then Ng Eng Teng, of course, Ng Eng Teng is our most, I would say, prolific and most well-known sculptor. Okay, but he was also a ceramicist as well. And Vincent Hoisington, okay, I believe, Mr. Choi would have been acquainted with some of them. Yeah, the Indian artist over there, he's quite a character, right, I heard. And, okay, I'll show you his work and talk about him. And then Ao Eng Kwang, right, the one on the extreme right. Okay, now Ao Eng Kwang, I believe he was more a ceramicist, okay, a potter, okay, because he ran a kind of pottery factory or workshop in Johor Bahru, okay. And of course you have Lim Nan Seng, right, the second from the left, okay, who is also a very well-known sculptor. Okay, so only like and Yeo Hui Bin, so only like Lim Nan Seng, Yeo Hui Bin, Ng Eng Teng, and perhaps Vincent Hoisington, right, can be considered to be the artists who are primarily concerned with, the sculptural form. Sculpture, I would say, is the bust of our first president, Yusof Ishak, right? It still exists today, that head of Yusof Ishak. Okay, so I don't have a photo of the first sculpture show, but the first sculpture show was held in the National Library. At that time, the National Library was also an art venue, right? Okay, and there were around 117 works, right, in the first sculpture show. Yeah, there were so many. In a wide variety of materials, wood, clay, right, metal, etc. Both abstract and figurative, right? Small scale, large scale. And you can see that in the second show as well. I mean, the first show must have been so successful that they were, the same 7 artists were invited, okay, to participate in the second sculpture exhibition. And this time it was held in the Victoria Memorial Hall. Okay, and you can see the sculptures there. I mean, those 4 interlinked figures, right? I believe those were made by Lim Yu Kwan, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and if you look at the background, there's one man, okay, a large-scale figure there carrying a vessel. Okay, that's entitled, I believe, the Fisherman. And and that's done by Yeo Hui Bin. Okay, Yeo Hui Bin, and I was in touch with his son. Unfortunately, his son, Mr. TTO passed away sometime, I think, last year, right? And and we were trying to look for that sculpture, right, in the background, which used to stand, I believe, in Alexandra Hospital. Okay, and I believe that these sculptures still are somewhere around Singapore. It's only that sometimes we have to, try to look for them. Okay, so what happened to all these works? We don't know. There are so many works, as you can see, right? And the one on the right, which this man is looking at, okay, that's a work by Yeo Hui Bin as well. Okay, a rather abstract, okay, looking work. Yeah, okay, all of you must be familiar with it, but who made this sculpture? Okay, now I have to be careful about using the word sculpture, right, because many people don't see this work as a sculpture, I don't know what they see it as, right? If it's not a sculpture, okay. You know, this work has been so derided, parodied, you know, and you know, some people say it's so kitschy, you know, it's a tourist symbol, okay. But at the end of the day, you know, I mean, it's a piece of sculpture, right? It was created by a famous sculptor. Anyone knows who created this work? Oh, you all have that. Okay, no cheating. Huh? You're looking at that. Sorry. Okay, for my slide, we don't have, right? I'm trying to test you. Okay, you already know who it is. Okay, Lim Nan Seng. Also sometimes spelled with a G, N-A-N-G, Lim Nan Seng. Right, and Lim Nan Seng, you know, he was, of course, I mean, Singapore at that time, when they wanted to create this work, okay, they called probably the most famous sculptor at that time, Lim Nan Seng, right, to execute the Merlion. Okay, and the design was actually done by a person who was working in the Singapore Tourism Board. Okay, and it was actually originally done as a symbol for the STB, and for many years, for many decades, it was a symbol, the logo of the STB. Okay, and it was only in 1972 that Lim Nan Seng was, asked to execute this in a three-dimensional form. Okay, and whatever it is, I think, you know, we have to read the interview that Lim Nan Seng gave and how he created the Merlion. You know, the kind of blood, sweat, and tears that went into the making of this sculpture. How he was, you know, swindled by, you know, people who he worked with as well, who never paid him, right, and things like that. Okay, and this work, you know, was done essentially with, you know, porcelain plates and bowls, you know. So it was quite an innovative work as well, right? And it was said, you know, that after he created this work, you know, Lim Nan Seng was very attached to it, and he frequently visited, you know, the Merlion. And he also wore a collar pin, a Merlion collar pin, right, on him, because he was, you know, so attached to this work. Okay, so I hope we all can see this, you know, as a piece of sculpture, right? Okay, in the history of, you know, of sculpture in Singapore, rather than just as a kitschy or, you know, kind of touristy symbol. Okay, which sometimes you cannot help but, you know, think of it that way. And there's a smaller version, I believe. Okay, the smaller version was also created by Lim Nan Seng. Now, cement fondue was quite a popular material with sculptors at that time because it's an easily worked material. Okay, you can easily repair the sculpture if, you know, something went wrong, it got broken and all that. Right, so, and it's a lightweight material as well. Okay, so it's quite a versatile material, right, cement fondue. And Lim Nan Seng is actually best known, he's also famous, of course, for his Merlion, but he's also best known for his animal sculptures. And I think he's probably the only, right, sculptor who actually made animal sculptures. Okay, there are no other sculptors that I can think of. Okay, the rest were making like figurative works or abstract works. Okay, he's probably the only one who made, you know, animal sculptures. And his this, you can see that, you know, his goats. Okay, and he used a particular type of clay that was found near the river. It's called the Malayan black river clay, right, or something like that. Right, so he worked with a particular type of clay, and in fact, his animal sculptures were very popular. Okay, and we were told that they were very popular with tourists, you know, who used to buy them, right? And I think that was a few years back. Now, a few years back, I was again contacted by someone from the URA. Okay, he was also part of the Tiong Bahru Residence Committee. Okay, and he was in the URA, I think, looking after, you know, such heritage monuments. And, you know, he was asking for more information into a particular work. Okay, and he asked me whether I know this work. I said yes, but I've never seen it. I was actually searching for it. Okay, but never got the time to look for it. Okay, I said, wow, that's just right. They contacted me. So he brought me to this garden in Tiong Bahru. Okay, where this sculpture is located, right? And to me, it's a long lost dancing lady. Okay, and you know, it's done by Lim Nan Seng, and you know, this sculpture is quite known to the residents in Tiong Bahru. All right, it has a certain resonance for the residents there. Right, in fact, there was a ceremony to unveil this sculpture. right? It was presided over by a minister, I believe. I can't remember the name. Okay, a minister or an MP, right? Okay, and residents in Tiong Bahru will be familiar with this sculpture, right? And this is a very good example of what public sculpture can do, okay, to forge a kind of communal identity, communal spirit, right? Okay, so we should not really, kind of neglect, public art or the potential of public art or sculpture. Okay, and there's a lot of talk about this sculpture when it was first unveiled. People try to think what it is. Okay, now some say it looks like a swan. Okay, they want to think that it's a swan because the swan is an auspicious symbol, right, in Chinese culture. Okay, and then children look at it and say, well, it looks like a prawn. Okay, I'm not sure whether it looks like a prawn. Okay, but if you look carefully, it's like a kind of a abstract or semi-abstract, okay, representation of a lady dancing, okay, dancing a kind of a festive, dance. Talking about Yeo Hui Bin, okay, now Yeo Hui Bin, as I said, I got to know more about Yeo Hui Bin's work through my acquaintance with his son, okay, Titi Yeo. And in fact, unfortunately, our National Museum, okay, do not have any of his works, right? So I'm hoping, that we can, because all his works are actually with the family, okay, distributed among the siblings, right? And actually LaSalle does have one. We do have a work, right? And the work is the bust of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, okay, because I think at the request of our founder, right, Brother McNally, he did a bronze version and gifted it to LaSalle, right? And so we have a bronze version of, okay, Lee Kuan Yew, and he was commissioned to do a bust of Lee Kuan Yew, and again, that shows you the stature of Yeo Hui Bin at that time, who was asked, right, to make a sculptural bust of Lee Kuan Yew. Okay, and we know that he's also a very versatile sculptor. Okay, he executed a number of his sculptures range from the abstract to the semi-abstract to the figurative. Okay, he could do both small scale as well as large scale works, right? And he could be very innovative as well. Okay, if you look at the bottom left, he did that work called, the universe. Okay, it actually comprised, everyday objects, right? Kitchen utensils and other kind of ordinary objects, right? And for a long time, Yeo Hui Bin taught in this school called Chun Cheng High School, right? But interestingly, he never taught sculpture. Yeah, he didn't, right? Okay, he didn't. And of course, one of his most famous so-called students, who actually learned under him is our own famous printmaker, Chng Sok Tin, right? The blind, printmaker. Vincent Hoisington, again, this is a sculptor that really is worth rediscovering, right? But unfortunately, many of his works are again untraceable. But I recently was told by his daughter, okay, that she managed to trace quite a number of his works through collectors. Okay, they're actually in the hands of collectors, right? And actually, our own collection and the National Gallery does have one of his works, right? A three-dimensional work of Vincent Hoisington. But Vincent Hoisington is actually most famous for his sculptures in the interiors of buildings, right? Whether it's a hotel or whether it's in Cathay Cinema, okay? Whether it's in the inside the windows of John Little's department store, Robinson's, okay? In fact, it seems that, at that time in the 60s, when you were walking, along Singapore, you'll definitely come across one of Hoisington's work, okay, because he was greatly in demand, right? Now, if you look at this particular work, right, he specialized in what you call aluminium etching or relief, okay, and it's a very unique kind of original style that he developed. And he was influenced by a number of sources like Egyptian, tribal art, okay, and most of all by music. Okay, he had a strong interest in music as well. So in his works, you always notice a very rhythmic quality, right, of the motifs in his work as well. Okay, Vincent Hoisington, right, I think he's like some of the other sculptors have really been under-acknowledged and, under-recognized, I think, in our art history. Okay, 70s and beyond. Now, in the 70s and beyond, now, the next milestone in terms of sculpture is the 1976 exhibition that was held in the National Gallery in the National Museum. Okay, the National Art Gallery, right, in the National Museum. Okay, in 1976. I think there was a show that was curated by Constance Shears, right? Yeah. Okay, and that was a big show as well. So in the 90s, from the 1970s onwards, and I think that the first and second sculpture show were a kind of catalyst, okay, for the gradual success, the gradual exposure of sculpture in Singapore. Okay, so from the 70s onwards, you see a lot more people, okay, practicing sculpture, okay, and kind of staging exhibitions, right? So I'm going to highlight some of these sculptors who worked in the 70s and 80s. But Ng Eng Teng, of course, had been practicing since the 1950s. So he had been practicing for at least 4 decades, right? Okay, he died in around 2001, 2002. So he had about 4 decades of practice. And he's definitely our most prolific and productive sculptor. Okay. And Eng Teng's work, he was, there's always a sense of humor, a kind of quirkiness and whimsical quality in his work, right? But there's always also a serious message. He was always very interested in humanistic themes, like human relationships. Okay, and that can be seen, for example, in his series of, mother and child and father and child, right? And this is one example called Responsibility 2. Now, when you look at this sculpture, certain things come to mind, okay, or certain phrases or proverbs, a chip off the old block, like father, like son, right? So you can see the striking resemblance between father and son. But I think what's striking here in this sculpture are the hands, okay, that seem to have been like disembodied, okay, from the figure itself. And the hands serve as a kind of protection, I suppose, right, okay, for the child, right? And this very iconic, historical, two of the iconic sculptures of Ng Eng Teng. Okay, I believe those who live in the well, I'm old enough, I suppose, right? In the 70s, you have come across this sculpture. Anyone can recall? Where did you see them before? Plaza Singapura, right? In the 70s. It was actually commissioned by DBS Land. Okay, so every time you go to Plaza Singapura, right, you will definitely see these two works. Okay, and these two works have been called Contentment and Wealth. Okay, and again, it's a very whimsical sort of figure, okay, with a very conical-like body and elongated neck, right? And it's hard to tell them apart, actually, right? But later on, they were removed. In the 1990s, right, DBS Land donated these two sculptures to NUS Museum. I don't know whether to NUS Museum or to NUS. Okay, but now they're actually on the grounds of NUS, and they have been moved several times as well within NUS. Okay, so they are really, in a sense, not accessible to the public, I would say, unless you go to NUS itself. Okay, and to me, it's kind of tragic in a sense that, sculptures which have been a part of the site for so long, have suddenly been, taken off the site and to be placed in another site. To me, whoever, Plaza Singapore Right itself has been renovated several times, you know. The owners or the developer could have helped to, you know, preserve this sculpture, you know, in that building itself, right? Rather than move it to somewhere that is no longer accessible. And then you have another famous sculptor, Han Sai-po. Okay, and I mean, the first quote, "Nature is important for me," sums up her practice, right? Because she's really inspired by nature, okay? And she's always, you know, in her work, you know, she always wants to stress that kind of, you know, that man has to live in harmony with nature. Okay, and then also, you know, if you look at these sculptors, Ng Teng, Han Sai-po, later on Brother Joseph McNally, Chong Fa Cheong, you know, okay, this group of sculptors in the 70s, 80s, they have a lot of respect for the materials that they work with. Okay, they have a lot of respect for the kind of intrinsic qualities of the material. Okay, and that's what the second quote is about. Okay, where Han Sai-po says, "When I'm working in stone, the immediate contact is physical." Okay, and you can read so on and so forth, right? Okay, I mean that's a kind of you know, approach they took, right, to making sculptures. Okay, I'm not sure, you know, today how many artists actually take this approach and have that respect, okay, for their materials, right? And he says, "Understanding the character of nature through the physical contact has become part of my sculpture." Okay, I think that's also a very significant statement. I think, Marie, you're referring to maybe the big seat. I mean, yeah. Yeah. I think what is so interesting about Han Sai-po's sculpture, again, you know, is that if you have met Han Sai-po in person, you know she's a very petite, right, individual. Okay, but she works with the hardest of materials, granite, very skinny. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yes. Okay, you know, granite and marble. Okay, are actually two of her most, you know, two of her favorite materials, right? And but again, you know, she can take these hard materials and then transform them, right, into you know, organic shapes, you know, that resemble life forms. Okay. Right, and that's what she did. For example, growth. Right, if you look at growth, it's actually now those forms there are actually made of marble. Okay, but she has, in a sense, breathed life into marble and give them, you know, some semblance of life there. Right. Okay, you can see some life forms in varying stages of growth. Right. Okay, in that particular work. Okay, and that one big seat. Now, where is big seat? Is it in the National Museum? The largest, so yeah, it's on the grounds of the National Museum, right? Okay, right. Same thing. That's made of sandstone. And one of the most famous works is this work called 20 Tons, Physical Consequences. Okay, that was actually in 2003, and it was actually in the atrium of at that time it was called MICA, the MICA building, right? The Ministry of Information and the Arts, the Hill Street building. All right, and today is of course outside the National Museum. Okay, and I think, you know, right now its location, it doesn't have the same impact as it did when it was, you know, in the atrium of MICA, right? Because, you know, and it features 6 monolithic structures, granite structures, all hewn out of a single rock. Imagine, hewn out of a single rock. Okay, a single granite rock. Okay, so with this work, okay, Han Sai-po wanted to invite us to her world. Okay, the world that she works in. Okay, and she invites participation from us. Okay, where you can actually, you know, go into around the sculpture, maybe touch it. Okay, feeling its rawness, its energy. Okay, coming close to you know, the primordial force of nature itself. Okay, so she wants to invite us, right, to her own world, okay, with this work. Okay, and I mean the title itself is Act, Physical Consequences. I mean, it must have taken her sheer energy, you know, and just to, you know, to hewn these, you know, structures out of that, right, granite stone. Of course, I believe she had assistants, right? But you know, she also works. I mean, right now she's in her 70s, okay, but she's still very much active. You all recognize this? Maybe the one on the left, of course. Okay, just outside the Asian Civilization Museum. Anderson Bridge, is it Anderson Bridge? That's called, right? Okay, Chong Fa Cheong. Anyone heard of Chong Fa Cheong here? I just want to know. Oh, that's good. Okay, only, well, 3 of you. Right. Okay, the rest probably have not heard of him. I think because Chong Fa Cheong is based overseas. He actually lives in Canada. Okay, he's moved there, I think, since the 80s or 90s for quite some time. All right. Although he has he's come back now and again, you know, to undertake commissions and all that. Okay, there are quite a number of his works being shown, you know, in the public. Okay, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's not so well known compared to other sculptors. Okay, but he actually got his training. He didn't have a kind of formal training. Okay, he was actually mentored by Brother Joseph McNally. Okay, you know, at that time in St. Patrick's, when Brother McNally was the principal in St. Patrick's. Okay, and there were some trees that were cut down, and he told Chong Fa Cheong to work with these trees, you know. So that's how Chong Fa Cheong got started. Okay, first with wood. So he could actually work with a variety of materials. Okay, and that's his most well-known public work, I would say, first generation. Okay, again is to mark the site where, you know, there used to be, I suppose, kampongs and all that, and you know, children would just jump right into the river. Okay, and it's a very interesting sculpture, very popular with shutterbugs, right? And the one on the right, I don't know where it is now. Okay, it used to be several places. The last time I saw it was like at the back of the Singapore Museum. Okay, now it's totally disappeared. I last heard that it was with the artist. Okay, I'm not sure whether it's back with the artist, right? Okay, but again, as I say, it's unfortunate that, you know, public works have to, you know, be moved several times. Okay, and here he depicts of course, a little bit of the history of Singapore, where coolies used to come here, right? And he wanted to commemorate, okay, their kind of the contribution they make, all right, to Singapore. Okay. I suppose that's the difference when you engage local sculptors to do work compared to, right, a foreign artist. I have nothing against foreign artists, but you know, I suppose, you know, being rooted here, you know, local sculptors who have, you know, could create, I suppose, work that could be shared more meaningfully, you know, with the public, right? Oh, that's another one. No, I've never seen it, so I want to go and, you know, one day see it. It's actually in Toa Payoh, right? Somewhere in Toa Payoh. It was actually commissioned by the HDB. Imagine, HDB commissioned it, right? It's called Mama's Precious One. It's made of marble. Okay, and here Chong Fa Cheong wanted to this sculpture to talk a little bit about the society in Singapore. You know, the idea of the extended family, right? Where, you know, the old would live with the young, look after the young, and then after you have full cycle where the young again would look after the old. Okay, but here you could see really the love between, you know, I suppose the grandmother, right? Okay, and the grandchild. Okay, and he's able to kind of depict the intimacy between the two. Okay, Brother Joseph, and then after this we'll just discuss briefly about you know, contemporary, right, sculpture. Brother Joseph, of course, is the founder of La Salle College of the Arts. Okay, it's actually three things in one. I mean, brother, as we call him affectionately, right? He's a man of the cloth, right? Of course, he's a priest, right? He's an educator, okay, and a sculptor, right? I mean, I've been privileged to, you know, to before he died in 2002, to at least know him for you know, at least 5 years, okay, and to be able to go into his office openly and, you know, just to talk to him, right, about his sculptural works and all that. He's of course born in Ireland. Okay, and then after that came to Malaysia and eventually landed in Singapore. Okay, where he became for a time, an educator. He was principal of St. Patrick's School. Okay, and later on in this is our 30th anniversary, so in 1984, right? 84, he founded LaSalle. Okay, it started off in St. Patrick's Art Center, okay, and then moved, several times, and then eventually to where we are now. Okay, now as a sculptor, Brother Joseph, again, like I suppose Heinz Paul, he has a lot of respect for his materials. Right? Okay, he says here very clearly, I take a piece of wood, stone, or metal to try to work with it, never against it. Right? Okay, so of course, the artist's decision was also important. Okay, but he will always be dictated by the accidental shaping of the material. In this case, he liked to work with wood. Okay, some of the oldest wood in the world, like 5,000 years old, which he actually got from Ireland, from the box of Ireland. Okay, he would ship it to Singapore. Okay, and he would be dictated by the accidental shaping of the wood. He would never do anything to try to manipulate it, but to be dictated by it. So he works in a very intuitive, very instinctive manner. Right? And these are some of his works. Okay? And some of his works have been made into more permanent materials like bronze, okay, bronzes. Okay, but this particular one is made, is in its original wood, right, bog wood. He named it Celtic animal, right? Of course, being Irish, he would have been exposed to that Celtic tradition. Right? But we don't actually know what animal it is. Right? As I said, Brother Joseph worked intuitively. Right? He would let the form emerge. Right? And but here we see, if you look at the kind of that motif over there, right? The curved motif, that's what you call a Celtic spiral. Okay, the kind of ornamental spiral there you see in many of the, for example, manuscripts. Okay. In the Middle Ages, right? And this work has been finished to a lustrous shine, right? Okay, and let's see another work of his. And he's always been inspired by universal themes, okay, especially the theme of education, right? And his works are never, I would say, exaggerated, right? Okay, he uses very subtle interplays, of the texture, the grain, the poses, the gestures, right, to communicate the intent of the work, right. So here, just by looking at the gesture of the poses of the figures, the undulations on the surface of the wood, the grain of the wood. Okay, we could tell, the attitude of these two figures. Okay, that one is a more, the mentor, right, the teacher. Okay, and the other one is listening attentively, right, to the teacher. Okay, so this is on the theme of education. And then he undertook his greatest challenge, right, which is to translate Chinese character into three-dimensional forms. And while I was talking to him, he sort of confided that he had a lot of difficulty in trying to do that, right? And sometimes he was not so successful, okay? And he didn't, for example, speak or understand, right, the Chinese language, okay? But he admired, okay, the beauty of the Chinese character, okay? And this is the Chinese word for heaven, okay? And I suppose the challenge is, as I said, how to translate, okay, a two-dimensional character into something three-dimensional, okay? And in particular, as you know, in Chinese calligraphy, the brush stroke, the gesture, okay, is something that would, that contributes to the success of that, that piece of work, okay? And here is trying to capture the brush stroke and the gesture in three-dimensional form. Okay, And I think for this work, okay, maybe more so for some of the others, he was able to do so quite successfully. Okay, you see the horizontal stroke, okay, and then it moves diagonally down and then ending up in an upward hook, okay, trying to capture the kind of gesture, right, the single stroke gesture of this Chinese character. Okay, so that's Brother Joseph McNally. Okay, and let me just, I'm coming to the end, okay, and this is probably the most controversial part of my talk. Okay, so far, we can recognize, what we see as sculpture. There's no debate, right? But in 1979, okay, there's this art historian, Rosalind Krauss. Okay, she wrote a seminal essay. It's seminal, is considered to be seminal, influential. It's called Sculpture in the Expanded Field. Okay? Because she was looking around her and she was noticing some shifts in artistic practices in the 60s and 70s. For example, along a narrow corridor, she'll just see like television sets, being displayed at the end of the corridor. Right? She'll go into the room and she'll see mirrors being displayed at, very odd angles. Right? And then she would go into, and then she would go into the landscape and she would see a work being done as part of the landscape. Right? So she came to the conclusion that perhaps, now how do we categorize these works then? Or these forms, these objects? Okay, so she said that, sculpture as it was defined then, okay, has to be expanded to include all these new practices. Right? Okay, and that's what she says. Right? She was saying about the diversity of practices then. Okay, and she says, unless that is the category can be made to become almost infinitely malleable. Okay, right? Now again, we can kind of debate with what she says. Should it be infinitely malleable? That's to say anything can be sculpture, right? Anything can be sculpture, right? If you cannot find an art form to define something, then you say, oh, that's a piece of sculpture, right? Is that, can it be so malleable? Okay. But anyway, that's according to Rosalind Krauss. Okay, and okay, so in contemporary sculpture, and I think what she said is in line with what is practiced today in the contemporary art world, what we call the postmodern world, right? Which operates according to what you call it, anything goes, ethos, right? Okay, and where we see an increasing blurring of lines between different art forms, where we can no longer tell whether something is sculpture or something is painting, right? So there's a blurring of lines. Okay, so these are some of the characteristics of contemporary sculpture, right? Okay, it's no longer dictated by the medium. It uses material that we no longer associate with sculpture, right? Okay, and okay, so that's one, and then there's a use of more than one medium of materials. It's no longer permanent. Okay, it can be temporal, it can be here today, gone tomorrow. Okay, especially with what you call earthworks, works done in the landscape, right? Okay, it can be used as part of an installation or even performance. Okay, where the artist uses his body, right, as an artwork. It's more concerned now with concept structures. It's now invested with social and cultural meanings. Okay? So these are some of the features that we can characterize, okay, sculpture that we see today, or rather sculpture or works that we see today. This is a quote by our, one of our most famous living artists, Tang Da-Wu. Okay? I will be talking about Tang Da-Wu in my last lecture on contemporary art, right? Because he and this group of artists called the Artist Village, okay, did a lot, to change the, the art scene here. Okay, when they introduced very experimental art practices, right? Okay, and what is sculpture to him? And he says, to him, sculpture is very much to do with things changing in the world, in everyday life. Okay, so I think that's a very significant statement, right? Okay, it has to be related somehow, okay, to life itself, to everyday life. Okay, and to him, nothing is permanent. Sculpture is not permanent. Okay, he says that they deteriorate and rot, right? And he says, I know this is not a very good definition, but it is more or less what I work with. Okay. 1991 exhibition. It's called Sculpture in Singapore, 1991. Right. Now, and it was curated by today, the most eminent art historian, okay, P.K. Sabapati. Right. And in that exhibition, there's a diversity of works. Okay, some of the works are what we know as, or what we recognize as conventional sculpture, with mass, volume, okay, using the usual materials like metal, clay and all that, right? Okay, but there are, this other body of works, okay, that do not fit into this conventional definition of sculpture, right? Works like this, okay, on the left, Piechito's, compass, works using everyday objects, found materials, okay? And of course, the most controversial of all, the most shocking of all, the one on the right, okay? Faisal Fadil, he has disappeared from the art scene, okay, I don't know what happened to him, okay? His study of pre-thermos flasks. Now, what is that work doing there in an exhibition on sculpture, right? Of course, some of you are shaking your head, okay? Of course, that work, is nothing new. I mean, Duchamp, in the 20s, he exhibited his urinal. Remember, the urinal is called Fountain, and that was bought from a second-hand hardware store. Okay, and it was, and of course, Duchamp modified that and displayed that as art. But this 3 thermos flasks was not even modified, I suppose. Right? They're not even modified. But if you look at the 3 of them, they're all different. Okay, so you can see that artists like Faisal Fadil at that time, they were very much interested in logic, in systems, right? Okay, in investing their work with certain cultural meanings. Okay, I'm not sure what this refers to. Okay, but you can see that, they are not conventional sculptures anymore. They are forms, they are objects, but, don't fit into our conventional notion of what sculpture is. Okay, so I think this show has done a lot to provoke people to thinking what sculpture is, okay, and working from the, Rosalind Krauss expanded version of, of sculpture. Okay, just a few more slides. Yeo Chee Kiong. Today, he's one of Singapore's most well-known sculptors. Right? This is taken from his website. Okay, Yeo Chee Kiong advertising himself as award. Yeah, he has won quite a number of awards. Okay, but I want to point out the key word sculptor. Okay, but also uniquely playful and unexpected juxtaposition. Okay, but the fact that he calls himself sculptor, right? Okay, but he creates works like this. Okay, now, of course, in recent times, his works have departed from the more, conventional sculpture which he used to do, right? In fact, his most recent works have to do more with performance, what we call performance art, than sculpture, right? Okay, so you have sculptors like him, trying to move away, okay, from, the conventional way of doing things. Now, this work is called A Day Without a Tree, right? It actually won the $45,000 Asia Pacific Breweries Award in 2008. Okay, I don't know how many of you have seen this work. It was at the National Museum, right? Okay, and when you go in, I'm not sure whether this is a very good picture, but there are other, other parts where it looks like a nuclear meltdown. The columns look like they are melting, the walls. Okay, and you have a flow of what looks like white milk or liquid. Okay, which are actually done with acrylic sheets. Right. So what Yeo Chee Kiong has done is that he has transformed a space here. Right. Okay, but it does not fit into our own conventional idea of what sculpture is. Okay. Now again, whether you consider this to be a sculptural work, I'm not sure. Okay, what we can call is that it's a site-specific work. Okay, because it works with a site, with a space. Right? But whether it's sculpture, well, that's really debatable, right? And this work, you know, in the Singapore Museum, there's a current exhibition going on. It's called Unearth. Okay, and that seeks to kind of intersect art and science. Okay, and I think that's where the Singapore Museum is going. Okay, in a sense, what you call interdisciplinary practice. Okay, intersection between art and science. Right, and in Unearth, right, you'll see a number of works. Okay, that I suppose one of these works is this. Well, you can call it site-specific installation. Now, if you go to the Singapore Art Museum, in front of it today, you'll see this large hole, square hole, right? And I think this work really reflects the title of the exhibition, Unearth. Okay, you see a plot of land, unearthed. Right? Yes?
Actually, I think the newspaper just did this and showed this. The display is not this, it's this piece, they glass it.
Ah, yes. That's interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Because what the artist has done is that she has intervened, in this work called intervention. She has made an intervention in the land itself. Okay, right? She has dug up this plot of land. Okay, and you're right. Okay, so that plot of land is now inside, being displayed inside the museum. Okay, but the question is, can this work itself, this particular work itself, be considered to be a work of art? Okay, it depends again on how you see it. Because the artist has intervened in the land. Okay, so this work, okay, might very well constitute a work of art itself. And of course, the work inside as well. Okay, the plot of land itself. Okay, can that be said to constitute sculpture? I mean, it's quite far-fetched to call this sculpture, but to Rosalind Krauss, okay, this may very well be, in her expanded definition of sculpture. Okay, because in that essay, she tries to talk about artists working with the land. Okay, what she calls the relationship between landscape and not landscape. Okay, meaning to say that meaning derived from the interaction between the artwork and the land itself.
I think it's more connected to land art.
Yes.
And land art is not sculpture.
It is. It's recognized as such as well. Yes. Yeah. Okay, the works of Christo, the works of Robert Smithson. Okay, but interesting. I mean, you don't see it as such, you see? Yes.
Consider as sculpture.
Earthworks. Okay, but as I said, it's not. It's debatable. All this, right? Okay, so this is actually her work belongs to this genre of art called earthworks, right? Where she works with the land. Okay, and Twazik Chorling's work, okay, she normally works with the land. And how about this work? This is also part of that show. Okay, and I suppose this work is from a Chinese proverb, pulling at grass to make it grow, right? And actually, I find it appropriate that it's made of elastic string. Okay, it's actually a crocheted, right? It's made of crochet, right? Crocheted elastic string because of the elasticity of the way we define sculpture today, right? Okay, I mean, can this be again considered to be sculpture, right? Or what you call installation, right? Again, sometimes these words are a bit fluid nowadays. Sculpture, installation, site-specific work. It looks like interesting work, right? And the Chinese proverb says that, if you try to, again, as I mentioned earlier, right, that many of these artists now try to invest their work with certain social or cultural meanings. Okay, so this work itself is a critique, I suppose, of the education system in Singapore, okay, where we try to force the child to learn, okay, and then when we try to force it too much, we pull at the roots, hence weakening, all right, okay, the growth of, right, of the tree or the grass, right. Okay, so I suppose all these works will make you ponder, okay, how this definition of sculpture now has changed. Okay, and lastly, to wrap it all up, very important, we have to think about how we treat, okay, our works of art. And, because when you display sculpture in the public, okay, we're talking about public art, public sculpture, you have to take into account the public, right? I believe that, right? I mean, the artist's vision is still paramount, it's important. Okay, but I suppose you have to, invest your work with certain content that is also accessible to the public. Okay, so questions, for example, about abstract sculpture like this, would the public be able to appreciate, such a work? Right? I'm not against abstract works, of course, okay, but what does it mean to the public? Okay, I mean, I would be interested to hear your views, if you have any views, right? Okay, if you don't look at the label, this work becomes, well, just a piece of abstract metal sculpture made of stainless steel, okay, by LCU, who is still practicing today, but, she's no longer, like, in the scene, I suppose, okay? Okay, this is the label, in fact, right? It's actually talking about it says here, the eternal flow of life-giving water, right? Symbolizing Singaporeans striving with one common purpose towards a better tomorrow, right? Okay, so I'm just, showing you this work, to maybe, ask the question of, how, when one creates a public sculpture, we have to think carefully about, a lot of things. The relationship between the sculpture and the land, the relationship between the sculpture and the community, okay, I think becomes very important. And more so with the Public Art Trust, in which the government has pledged $10 million, right, okay, to commissioning works, not only for works in the city, but going into the suburbs, to the heartlands, to HDB estates and all that, right? Okay, and they are trying to get, public views about, okay, what sort of works will go into those sites. I mean, how about work like this, maybe, or the one by Chong Fa Cheong, celebrating, for example, our history. Okay, maybe to you, you might say, well, it's too obvious, right? These are the Samsui women, those are the coolies, it's too literal, right? But I'm not sure. Okay, but I suppose such works could be, more accessible to the public. So I suppose the best works are those with a kind of formal sophistication. Aesthetically they are very attractive, but at the same time they have a kind of symbolic accessibility. You can understand when you see the work. Okay, they are not too, not too inaccessible. Right? So how to strike the balance between the two? Okay. And lastly, talk about how we treat our public sculpture, And this was the one that actually got me writing to the forum. Okay, I wrote to the forum, that was in 2011, okay, when, there was an article in the Straits Times that appeared, okay, which said that the works of this sculpture called, the work of this sculptor called Chua Boon Ki, okay, called Water Bubbles, have actually been covered, okay, with the intention of shifting them to some place more safe. Okay. Now the reason is that these sculptures are made of stainless steel. Okay, so when it gets hot, it can pose a danger, right, to passers-by, especially to children, right? So I had to write in to say that, well, we cannot just at our whim and fancy, move sculpture to another location, because when a sculpture is made, okay, a public sculpture is made with the site in mind, with the location. So when you change the site, you're actually compromising the integrity of the work, right? Okay, and that's very important. When Richard Serra, when they removed his tilted arc, that famous arc, the tilted arc, okay, which created, and when just after it was created, the workers and some top people petitioned to get it removed, right? He refused to display anywhere else because he said that work is made for the site itself. Okay, it's site specific. It can never be displayed anywhere else. Right? So that sparked that article in the forum which I wrote, sparked a whole kind of discussion in the papers about the way we treat public sculpture. Okay. And then I was told also, the artist didn't want me to pursue it further. He was like, it's okay, right? Okay. But I thought, that this is an issue. The way we treat public sculpture, that's why a lot of our public sculptures disappeared. Works by McNally, you know, and people like that, okay, simply disappeared because, you know, as you know, Singapore has changed a lot, and every time we destroy a building, we also destroy the works of art inside, you know. I mean, the contractors here, they don't probably care. They just, you know, just throw everything, right? And recently, there's also this work, and which also prompted me to write another, okay, article to the forum where the artist Ben Pua with his work in UT Estate, okay, this work called The Tree of Life, okay, and in fact the town council wanted to remove or throw away this work because they could not maintain it, or at least they could not afford the cost of maintaining this work. Okay, the artist said, well, you can do it, but for a small fee, of course, right? It's only right to give you a small fee. Okay, but the town council said, well, we have no money, so we probably just throw it away. Okay, and I don't know whether it's due to my article, but later on the town council said, well, they will pay for the maintenance of this work, and they will get people in the community to help to maintain it, right? So this is not the end, you know. I mean, you know, hopefully. Yes. Jacqueline.
Sculpture that I made actually, that no longer is on site.
Oh, Jacqueline is also a practitioner, so she also makes.
Yeah, I can see this work that I made in 2012. Then Pongo, the community sculpture that I got residents of Pongo to come together to contribute to the sculpture. So it's near the Pongo CC, the Pongo CC. It can spread.
It's there now, is it?
No longer. The other day I went, so I had intention to ask him. It was commissioned by HDB. So with the minister
Okay.
coming for opening and all that. But I intend to write. I haven't had time to write to them yet.
Okay. What you want to write to them about?
Just ask them when, because they told me that the sculpture is supposed to be there for 3 to 4 years.
Oh,
But
it's gone.
It's gone because in 2012.
dear. Okay.
I made the sculpture in 2012.
Right. Okay. So you don't know where it is now?
I don't know.
Oh boy, you see, that's the problem. You see, that's the problem. Missing sculpture report.
It's actually a nice project because they wanted this the emphasis to me was that Pongo was it's a new resident area, and they wanted the residents to come together and make something. We conducted a workshop.
Yeah.
And then the families contributed recycled materials from their house, metal like pots and pans.
Oh, okay,
things
right.
and then so I used their elements and then made it into the sculpture.
Right.
I intend to check, but I haven't had time.
So you went one day and then you saw it's gone.
I've taken the bus.
Oh, that must be quite a shock to you.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked, but I never had the chance to do it.
Oh dear.
So
Okay.
when you brought this up, I thought
I know.
I should share.
Yeah. Hopefully it's still intact, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will check with the HDB.
It's true. And you know, like America, they have a buyback clause. I don't know whether they have it in Singapore. If you were to destroy the sculpture or anything, the artist has a right to buy back. Of course, there's an irony as well because the work is so expensive that the artist cannot, you know, simply just buy back the work. You see, but at least inform the artist where, you know, the work is moved to. Yeah. You see. Yeah. You have to think of maintenance as well. You just can't, you know.
Tell them actually say that you have maintenance, of course, that you have the
Correct.
But even if it's not the artist who's doing the maintenance, but you do hire somebody else.
Precisely. So the public art trial is good because they built in the maintenance costs in the commission, you know, the fee. So that's good. Yes, I've ended my session. Maybe you want to hear your views if you have any, you know.